Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Patricia Raskin, co-host with Barry Weinhold of the wonderful program that Barry has created called Finding Hope, the End of Suffering, and we're in episode 2. Welcome, Barry. It's really fun to be with you.
Good to see you, Patricia, and good to be working with you on this project.
Yeah, we have a great guest, and
Yeah.
we introduced her last week, but she's really, when you talk about finding hope, she's really found it. And she's worked through her pain and suffering, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Right. Susan Blue, will you come forward and we'll start our interview with you?
Hi,
Susan.
Hello.
And I want to start with the first general question about what happened to you, and go back as early as you can, that caused you a lot of suffering in your life.
Well, my suffering physically began 2 weeks after I was born. Just a little backstory. My mother had mental illness. She was pregnant with me. My dad and my older brother were in South America because that's where my dad could find work. He was a mining engineer. They thought it was better for her to stay stateside and then join the family after my birth. 2 weeks after my delivery, my mother smothered me. And she went in and was treated for postpartum depression. They did insulin shock therapy with her. So she was gone for about 3 to 4 days, and then she would be back with her dad, who she was living with at that time, for 3 to 4 days. And so that went on for about 3 months. I was a healthy, vigorous child, lucky me. And so we joined my dad and my brother in Peru, where my dad was an engineer in developing the tin mines. We moved probably about every 4 to 6 months.
Wow.
And we were in different mining villages in the Andes. The highest we lived was 17,000 feet. My brother and I have big chest, really big lung capacity because of that. Most of the time, my mom was totally dependent on the native help.
Can I stop you for a minute?
Yeah.
I want to just go back and pick up a piece that you said and ask you to elaborate a little bit. A fairly traumatic kind of birthing situation with your mother smothering you, and after 2 weeks and all that. How did that all affect you? Do you have any idea of what effect that might have had on your life?
Well, lack of trust.
Sure.
Okay, lack of trust. Too big of a sense of self-reliance. So I have not been a person who was very available in relationship.
Yeah.
What I learned from my mother, and being the oldest girl, was how to be in relationship with people because I was needed. I was well into my 30s before I had a sense of self for myself.
Yeah.
And
a long-term effect on you.
Yeah, lifelong. It's part of why I do the work that I do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was interested in that. I'm glad you
Okay. Sure.
I have a question too. When you say you didn't have lack of trust because, again, you didn't know when something might happen, right? You didn't know if somebody would try to smother you again, or if maybe you felt as though someone was smothering you. Did you have that kind of sense of things at times?
Yeah, I still have. I'm reactive about people putting their hand too close to my head.
Wow.
And, that has been a problem with both of the husbands and some of the men that were my boyfriends. And it's also startled some of my girlfriends. So that's there. It isn't as pronounced or as profound a trigger as it has been. So there's a lot. So that I had bonding from Big Juana, who was our maid, and my brother. My parents weren't much available.
Yeah, that's interesting, Susan, because what we found is that a lot of people who had bonding breaks with mothers, or they had a lot of trauma early on, that there was somebody else in their life that kind of filled in the gap and maybe actually helped them survive. And we call it the Aunt Rosie condition. And this has gone worldwide. We have some of our graduates and our students that are working in Africa, and they go into the backcountry and talk about Aunt Rosie, and the women know that what they mean when they talk about Aunt Rosie. It's like yeah, there was somebody who was there to help me. So that was good that you had those people there to make it a difference.
Yeah, I consider myself the luckiest woman in the world because I have always had someone there for me, and in different ways. So I have a long list of what happened. So we came back to the States. I was 2.5. We were in Bisbee and then Tucson, and my dad was not home much. I didn't have much of a bond with him, so I was ready to have a different dad. And it was just because I didn't have that much of a and being a little girl, I wanted to cuddle and do all of this stuff. And my dad was a man who was older and having a family, so he was pretty tired, and he liked it, but he wasn't very responsive in that way. So I was very bonded with my older brother, but he was also 5 years older than I was. I had a younger sister when I was 5, and so we were stacked. My parents were very modern and kind of knowledgeable in a way that most people weren't. Both of them were educated in a time where a lot of people didn't get an education. So we were in these mining towns, which didn't seem to have that much of an effect on me until I went to school. And my first year of school, we were in Grand Junction. My dad was working for the Atomic Energy Commission. And I went to school with a very small amount of people who had been like, stable middle class, the merchants, the grocery store runners, that kind of thing. And the rest of us would be what you would call tramp mining families. And so nowadays you would call that kind of population at-risk children, unstable adults, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of violence. So first grade was kind of a shock because I went from this kind of weird home life into having friends and being very lonely. I was just like delighted about it, but also I didn't have much in the way of social skills. And the other thing is that because there was such a large segment of tramp mining kids, I fought because I had an older brother, and I just fought him because one of the things that can happen when you have a lot of bullying trauma in your life, you can either duck and cover and hide. And I found out early on, just from my brother, that duck and cover would just not do me any good. So I became a fighter. And and I got into a lot of trouble because it was very unusual for a little girl to be whacking the boys back and chasing them down
Yeah.
and tackling them. And I was that girl. We went
At this time, it would probably be admirable, right? With what's going on in today's world, but not.
well, yeah, it was not seen. It was like there was something wrong with me for people.
Mhm.
Because I was defiant with adults that I just felt were over the top in their way of dealing with myself or other kids. I stood up for other kids who got bullied.
Susan, I have a question.
True.
I have a question. Do you think that somewhere in there was some confidence and some belief in yourself? Because, I mean, yes, you could say, well, you were just angry and this was your way of letting out anger, but the fact that you stood up for people and you stood up for yourself, it feels like there was some sort of confidence in there. You believed in yourself in some way. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. At that time of my life, that ended up with this rage of like, oh, just stop.
Right.
There was so much craziness with adults, besides us kids trying to figure it out, and all of these different rules. There wasn't a lot of stability. There wasn't a lot of stuff that really kind of spoke to us as people. And it was like we were another target for adults that were not well. And I had this rage to live. And so this would get triggered. I was the kid in the principal's office, so my socialization was very, very difficult. By the time I was in the third grade, things had changed enough that the tramp mining families that were going to settle in were settled in, and they were doing well, and the rest of them moved on. And that's really when the hard work really started.
Yeah, Barry, I want to ask Barry a question on this. Barry, do you think that Susan's story about, fighting back and standing up for herself, do you think that was maybe the beginning of her being able to find her own way?
Yeah, well, in families, there's usually three types of people. There's the complier, the person that follows all the rules and does everything that they're told. There's the person who's kind of the loner, who just disappears and doesn't interact with very many people. And the third one is the rebel. And Susan was more of a rebel. And the people who are rebels usually have more self-esteem than the other two.
That was the question.
Yeah.
And I also think the silver lining is that because of that, it allowed you to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have become very passive. You could have become quiet. You could have become someone who just, lays back and gives in and just goes with the flow. And you didn't do that. And so I think sounds like that was the beginning. Because when we want to look at, yes, you went through pain and suffering, but look at the outcome and what it, the positives of it.
Yeah, talk a little bit more now about the things that happened that caused suffering, and as you move on into teen years and beyond.
Well, as an early teen, I was treated for a progressive scoliosis, the S for Susan in the spine. And so at 13, I had 13 vertebrae surgically fused. There were 2 operations to do that. I started 7th grade for 2 weeks, and then I was out and didn't return until the school year started after the Christmas holidays. I had a body cast. I had braces for, it was a year and a half afterwards. And then when I was 15, I had the upper section from T1 to T8 refused because it wasn't stable. And that went really fast because I only had 1 shot of morphine after I came out of recovery from the surgery. And I just didn't want to have the weird dreams. And I found that morphine for me gave me a space where I could rest, but it did not diminish the pain. So I went through that second surgery. I mean, my recovery, my healing, everything was record time. They were really surprised. I was also the youngest person that they did this procedure with at that time. Usually they waited for you to be 15. This is before rods. So this was all bony,
Fusion.
yeah. And also the other thing that they did is that they used sheep bone rather than taking bone from my thigh or from my hip. And I think that really saved me an awful lot because when you're in that developmental stage and you have that kind of scarring on those big bones, it really diminishes your ability to have a good immune system.
Yeah.
So when I got into junior high, I was really the girl with this big cast on. And my brother's joke that he used to tell people is that they said, "What happened to her?" And he'd say, "Oh, mom threw her down the steps and she broke her neck and her back." And the sad thing is that I didn't get thrown down the steps, but I did get thrown around. And that could have been true with some of the things that I had gone through. And so the violence at home and that early violence from the society of tramp mining, people with get-rich schemes, it wasn't until I was in high school that I was like able to control my temper and not get into a fist fight. And so that was a really big deal for me. And I also found out that I had some kind of talent, like I could be an artist, I could be a poet, maybe, and that I could act. And so things really just started opening up. And before I had my surgery, I was the kid who could have been a gymnast. And I love dance. I love movement. And at that time of my life, I thought I would be a dancer. And
so it really changed.
Yeah, so that's what it was.
Vision of who you could become very radically.
Yeah. So I had to remodel, and I had no idea what was going to happen to me because I didn't know what kind of life that I could have. The doctors told me never to get down on my hands and knees and scrub a kitchen floor. And I think there was a whole list of things that I wasn't supposed to do or shouldn't do with so many vertebrae surgically fused. And so, it was a real time of reckoning. And I think this is when I really started to wake up spiritually. Because it wasn't going to be my choice. It wasn't going to be what I wanted. It was going to be about what can I do with this body that I have. And I was really curious. So time goes on, and I did do a little bit of college. I met my future husband, the father of our children there, and we married. We had 2 boys, and that brought up a whole lot of chronic pain because my pregnancies were 22 months apart, and the curvature and the fusions, I did not have the stability to have the kids as close together as I did and not have a lot of suffering. I couldn't do chiropractic because of the fusions. I mean, there was very few people that would have had the skills to even begin to handle something like that.
So you really, I mean, you have, because of everything you went through, and that's why you have such a strong skill with the body working, because you really, you went through all of that I mean, in like every vertebrae of your body. So like when Barry said last time that when you worked with him, he felt as though you touched his soul. Part of that is because you have felt all of that in every single part of your body. So it's kind of helped you to feel that with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like what gets the nervous system reconnected. So I traded massage with other people really early when I was a potter. I was in a group of 22, and it wasn't unusual for people to ask me to give them some help. And I was doing Tai Chi at that time, also beginning a lifelong meditation.
So go ahead.
And that's a good segue for next time.
Yeah, I think
so. Really, how you started really getting on this path.
And also how you start to make sense out of all the
exactly
chaos you had in your childhood. And we'll pick that up next time.
All right. So thank you for listening, everyone, to Finding Hope, Ending Suffering with Barry Weinhold, who's the creator of this wonderful podcast and his book. Barry, right? Your book is Finding Hope, The End to Suffering.
That's the title of the show.
The title of the show and the title of the book
is Get Real, The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self.
Okay. All right. And so that goes along, though, right? I mean, that's very similar. There are a lot of elements of the podcast in the book.
Of course.
But now we're bringing it to life.
Right.
And so thanks so much. And thanks, Susan. And we'll be all back with you next week. I'm Patricia Raskin.
I'm Barry Weinhold. See you next week.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real, The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope, The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.